Okay, awesome. So as David mentioned, I'm the climate change specialist and waste management advisor at Nokiiwin Tribal Council. I've been here for just over a year now, and have been working with the Up North on Climate group since I think, probably about October of last year. So they've been great in building my capacity and helping me to pass that on to our communities, and this is one of those ways. I have an undergrad in science and a master's in environmental science, so I did have some knowledge of climate change and sustainability measures, but this has definitely helped to continue that on. So today I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that Nokiiwin has done in my time here and also before my time here, and talk about the indicators within the Robinson Superior Treaty specific to the Nokiiwin communities, but you'll see how some of it may be applicable to hopefully your communities in your areas as well if you're not from those communities of Nokiiwin. Okay, so today, go over what we're gonna go through. So we're gonna look at Nokiiwin's work in climate change over the years, talk about what we've heard from elders and community members throughout the process. We're gonna take a look at what Western sciences says and looking at projections across our communities. And then we're going to talk about the connection between that elder knowledge and the Western science and go into where we can go from here with this information, adapting to the future and looking at what kind of indicators we've found, and hopefully get some discussion going about where to go next. The climate topic, I think, is really important to have that discussion and to have other people and their expertise come into play as well. So feel free to jump in. I can't see the chat, but if you jump in and you want to say something as I'm talking, like I'm totally okay with that. I also have a very knowledgeable team with me here, so when we're talking in discussion, I'm sure that they'll be able to help out as well. I've kept some of the information pretty general when we talk about the First Nations with Nokiiwin without giving away too much sensitive information from the climate change reports that we've done, and I'll explain those a bit more later. But you'll see how they're all related. So these are the five First Nation member communities of Nokiiwin. You can see we're spread out. We're no farther than, I think, 300 kilometers from each other, each of them. So there's Fort William First Nation, Bingwe-Nayashi Anishinaabeg, Anambigo-Zaging Anishinaabeg, Binchujawabeg Zaging Anishinaabeg, and Net-Mizagaming Anishinaabeg as well. So I'll talk about those probably as Fort William First Nation, BNA, Aza, BZA, and Pikmobert. So just to give you an idea as well, so say like if you're not from around here, Fort William First Nation to Bingwe-Nayashi and BZA is about 180 kilometers. From that area over to Pikmobert is about another 300, and from Fort William over to Pikmobert's about 370 kilometers. So just to give you an idea of how far away these areas are. So Nokiiwin's done some work in climate change in the past. In 2016, we did a country food study that was funded by with CanNorth. So we looked at traditional food types typically harvested by community members. They were quantified, typed, and located. So that included traditional meats, including moose, snowshoe hare and deer, fish, birds, berries. And they were, as well as being located, we gathered information from community members in interviews about how these traditional foods are used and located. And then on top of that, the food and water samples were chemically analyzed from these traditional locations for concentrations of contaminants. And for the most part, everything fell below, didn't have any sort of chemical risk in regards to metals in the foods other than fish. There was high mercury levels in fish in certain lakes. So that led to some guidelines around that, or at least supported those guidelines. From 2013 to till now, and extending until 2021, as Tara was saying, we've been working with the Laurentian group and the Up North on Climate group, funded by NRCan, doing the BRACE program, which stands for Building Regional Adaptation Capacity and Experience. So that's what brings you here today. So the first section of this project was where we collected elder and community knowledge in regarding climate change adaptation and connected that to Western science. And we came up with a final climate change report for each community entitled Adapting to a Changing Climate for consideration in preparing a community-based climate change adaptation plan. So I don't know if you can see me, but they have little books like this. They're quite big and very useful. So much information's in here. So most of these communities will have these available at the band office, or I have like PDF versions as well with permission of them to distribute to community members. So that's what I'm going to base a lot of the information from today on. And then the second part of the project, which has been from 2019 up to 2021, is looking at using what we've learned from these climate change reports to build climate change adaptation capacity within the climate change specialists and within the communities by using an online adaptation knowledge network, by creating resources and hosting workshops. So to speak a little bit more about the climate change reports, these were completed in 2018. So we had information from knowledge from elders and community members given anonymously. And it talked about, we had information on background of the of each community, looking at what elders have said and what science says, and kind of looked at reasonings of why warming has sped up. Next, we had like a little climate story for each community and what to expect in the future, and then preparing for the future. So there's different adaptation matrices and ideas related to each of the items that came up, such as drought, flooding, health, and preparing youth. So I want to give a special thanks to each of these people. Some of them are here today. Aisha's here. From each of the communities, we had certain climate change champions that went in and did the interviews with the community members. And some of them now have continued, some have moved on. So in AZA, we had Kyla Morso and Mason Shawa Hamish. At BNA, we had Audrey Mandela, and now that's Asia McNally. BZA, we had Kayla Thompson. Pic-Mobert First Nation, we had Candice Deschamps, who's now replaced by Jessie Gaudette. And at Fort William First Nation, we have Elizabeth Esquega, who I believe is now with Robert Pierre. Okay, so yeah, in 2019, January 2019, Nokiiwin hosted a workshop on adaptation and went over, kind of talked about these climate change booklets as well, and did some discussion and brainstorming. So again, they looked at some of the adaptation strategies, and I wasn't here for this, but as far as I know, the discussion and brainstorming session here informed this next stage of the project, which included the online knowledge network, and kind of steered us in this direction. So again, I'm going to be keeping things general to keep sensitive information, general for each community. But this is kind of what we heard from these interviews with elders in each of our communities. Some are specific to one community, some are more broad, where we heard the same thing over and over for the North. We chose elders. They're the knowledge keepers of the community. They've lived these changes. They are able to speak about concern for the future and disruption of this traditional relationship of First Nations with the land. And some of this can be especially seen in remote and northern communities. So basically, as a short summary, the overall response was that there has been change, and lots of it. I found it really great to see that lots of the elders had kept really meticulous records. So some of them had even noticed changes in the difference of water temperature, and they even had like the degrees up to 7 or 8 degrees of the water change. So getting into it, some of the main areas of concern that we saw were changes in the fishing community. Commercial fishing in some areas is no longer sustainable. The fish are less plentiful and smaller. There's a shorter fishing season, and some people have trouble accessing traditional fishing and hunting spots as a result of the changing climate. We heard of loss of wild berries and loss of the knowledge of location of these areas and in harvesting. We heard that there were that the geese, ducks, and other birds are less plentiful. Migration routes have changed. However, many new birds like pelicans, swans, cranes, and cormorants have appeared. Some birds now stay year-round rather than leaving. So that was a big change. And we also found or heard that animals are also around, like cats. There's fewer porcupine, fewer moose, skunks, and caribou, and the wild rice amounts are less plentiful as well. So we also heard how water levels in lakes and rivers are lower. Some creeks have dried up. Some elders had said that beaches have disappeared, that islands, points had been washed away in recent years and in certain regions. Some had said that certain areas, the water level had actually increased and made it easier to navigate certain waterways. So there's differences here. Ticks and disease is more prevalent. We heard that there are now drier conditions that are making communities more prone to wildfire. There's dry land, the trees, all the moisture is getting sucked out of the land. We heard of warmer water and weather in summers up to 8 degrees. We heard about how lakes and rivers don't freeze like they used to. So the freeze up is later. In some areas, the winters were so cold that the frozen lakes and creeks used to be important for both travel and ice fishing, and they just aren't available anymore. We heard of the warmer weather and how there's more frequent winter rains, and this creates unsafe ice conditions and also slower ice cover. We heard of less snow. There used to be snow from November to March, according to some elders, and now at this point we're sometimes lucky to have snow by Christmas. So again, there's unsafe ice conditions that we're now facing, affecting winter fishing and hunting. Elders told us how the moose have been vulnerable to fall through the ice. Air and water pollution is more prevalent. We've heard notes of changes in the cloud cover. We heard of invasive plant and animal species taking over certain regions and preventing traditional foods from growing. For example, there's invasion of thistles and other strange new flowers popping up all over the highways. Some reported more poplar trees than before. Cherry trees, wildflowers, dandelions were all mentioned to have disappeared or be scarce now, and that algae is more prevalent as well. So they also noted changes in the forest. So elders mentioned much concern over forestry practices and clear cutting, including chemical spraying. They found that there is fewer trees, and some of them are dead and dying. Spruce trees don't grow as tall. So just listing some of these, I think it's pretty clear how how important elder knowledge is. They're such an important information source. And they just evaluate the climate and climate change in a way that scientific methodology just can't reach. So I find that really interesting. And another point is that many of the elders, as a summary, indicate that lots of the changes they found they consider to be worse for themselves, the community, and for future generations. Oops. Okay, so here are some quotes that I took from the climate change reports, and I thought these were really telling and really meaningful to speak to climate change. So I'll read some of them. Climate changes are playing havoc with the gathering of traditional plants, hunting, fishing, and travel to remote reserves. Couldn't use winter roads to visit friends and to trade resources. I can't get too many fishing or hunting spots on the lake or the bush due to low water. When I was younger, even kids as young as 3 noticed how abundant blueberries were. Now my grandchildren are 3 and there are very few berries and they're hard to find. There is not much area to pick any kind of berries. Even the cedar, which is used for medicine, is orange. The future of our community will most likely be affected if the warming trend continues by drought and fires. We used to have the best drinking water in the world. Moose are declining. They are not in the swamps where they should be, especially in winter. Ticks get all over the moose. They go in cold water, so the ticks fall off. So I know it sounds doom and gloom, but I think that this quote from an elder really sums it up well. We have to adjust. So that's why we're taking a look at climate science, and that's why looking at adaptation is so important. By looking at these indicators and having this data and this background and baseline information is crucial to understanding what's happening and the rate that things are changing at, because only at that time are we able to understand how to best adapt and how to best perhaps protect areas or return areas to their natural state if that's what's desired. So the quote is, "We have to adjust as people because we're tied to the land." So now I'm going to move into some of the Western science part of it. I just wanted to show again this map so that people have an idea of where I'm talking about when we're going to be looking at some of these climate plots. So this is Lake Superior, and we have our communities up here. So we're going to kind of be lumping together the AZA, BNA, and BZA because most of their data was the same. In regards to this climate Western science, as they're going to be considered along the Lake Nipigon region. So these are some graphs here made by the lovely Cass on our team, so thank you. So they're all from climatedata.ca, so I really encourage people to take a look at this website. It's full of lots of really good information and can be specific to your communities. So first I just want to point out, when you take a look at these graphs here, the black line, I wonder if you can see you can't see my mouse probably. When you're looking at the black line on the graph, that's showing the historical data, the historical data. And then the red line here, you'll see 2 different projections, is the red line and the green line. So the red line indicates the RCP 8.5. So that pretty much means this is a scenario where there's high emissions or low effort to curb greenhouse gas emissions, pretty much worldwide. So AKA that's kind of like if we do nothing or if it's business as usual. So the 8.5 model shows a 4.3 degree temperature increase globally by 2100. Whereas when you look at this green line here, that's RCP 4.5. So that's more of like a medium effort to curb greenhouse gas emissions. This is more relatable to what countries and businesses are committing to now. There actually is, it's not shown on these graphs, but there's actually a third RCP value that's even lower. It's RCP 2.6. it's showing essentially if we like stopped everything that produced greenhouse gases, and it's kind of unrealistic, so I didn't include that. So I have these projections here. You'll see one for Fort William, the Lake Nipigon region, including these BZA, BNA, and AZA communities, and then Pick-Mobert. So seeing as some of these are only 180 kilometers away, I think it's really interesting to see that there actually are differences between each of the communities. So keeping in mind as we're looking through the next slides that looking at these differences really highlights how there needs to be community-based monitoring and recording in each of the communities, and individualized adaptation plans and procedures. It's really showing that we just can't blanket the entire North, and this is just a snapshot of that. So these graphs here are looking at the average fall temperature. So you can see that right now we're in the 4 to 5 range for average fall temperature. It's going to be increasing about 2 degrees, it looks like. 1 to 2 degrees by 2050. We have the spring temperature here. So a similar trend where it's increasing about 1 to 2 degrees in each of the communities. So the average summer temperature, you'll see a bit more of an increase, about 3 degrees in some cases in each of the communities. So although this may seem nice to some people, you know, we have to think about how an increase in temperature really does indicate that there'll be more heat waves, and this can likely be very stressful for elders, children, and those at high risk. To the point where people can get heat stroke and get really sick, and can even be fatal if there's no cool place available to be. We have to think about how many homes right now aren't equipped for extreme heat. People who live in apartments that may be on the top floor, or people that don't have air conditioning, would be at higher risk. I'm sure many of you know, but in Southern Ontario cities, they actually have cooling centers for those without air conditioning in their homes. So this might be something that could be a reality one day in this area. So the higher summer temperatures also lead to evaporation from the lakes and rivers, and this causes drought and an increased risk of forest fires. And then here showing the average winter temperature, which is also getting warmer. Again, since sometimes we have really cold winters, this might sound nice, but you know, it is important to know that animals rely on the winter freeze. This is going to be affecting ice roads, ice fishing, harvesting of traditional foods over the winter. Ice safety becomes a really big issue at this point. We're going to be expecting a lot more extreme weather events, especially in the winter. And with this warmer temperature of winter, it also means that we're going to be seeing, it's going to be a lot wetter. Snow will be melting, and that also means that we're going to be more prone to flooding, not only in homes, but entire communities, as we've seen up north when there's been evacuations. So that's another thing to think about with infrastructure when we're planning housing and just city planning, or planning in the community. Like, how are we going to be planning for flooding in the future? For example, building culverts, or making sure that the culverts are actually working, and that houses are structured in order to prevent flooding of their home. So this graph here shows the days below 25 degrees Celsius. So there's a pretty big difference that you see here in the communities. Like, for example, Fort William First Nation goes from 16 to 7 or 16 to 4 days below 25. So that's a pretty drastic difference. Same in the other two graphs that you'll see. So there's going to be a large seasonal temperature difference here. And this is going to be affecting, like I was just saying, with ice and stuff. Like if we're having so many days below 25, as compared to what we used to have in the 2000s or in 1950, it's really going to start to affect ice formation. So here's a little graphic from the Up North on Climate page. It gives some ideas about how to manage changing snow loads. So because of, with climate change, although it's saying, okay, so we're going to be seeing warmer winters and warmer summers, that doesn't mean that we're not still going to have some big dumps of snow, and sometimes a lot more extreme than what we're used to. And again, when you get a big dump of snow and then the weather changes and it becomes warmer, that's going to start melting and it's wet and it's heavy. So it's definitely something to think about with infrastructure and housing. So there's a couple ideas here in this little graphic here. So thinking about exposure to wind, adjusting the rooftop equipment, looking at flat roofs if those need to be perhaps sloped, looking at overhangs. And this poor kid looks like he's about to get turned into a snowball. So yeah, thinking about that sort of stuff going forward. And then to contrast, here are the days above 30 degrees Celsius. So as you can see in each of the communities, there's quite the increase. So we saw this before with the increase in summer temperatures, but you can think about, you know, for those people that may not have air conditioning in their home, the animals that are not prepared to deal with, you know, up to 9 days of above 30 degrees when they're used to 2. So thinking about that sort of stuff. With the days above 30, you can also think about food spoilage, heat illness and fatalities, and how animals may be moving north where it's colder because of this high heat. This also plays into effect the warmer lakes and rivers, which can be fatal to fish or alter their spawning, which we're already seeing as we heard from elders. We're already seeing changes in fish spawning and fish habitats. Same with animals. So, you know, this is becoming a reality, and it's something that we're able to see from the science and also see from what we're hearing from elders. So here's the frost-free season as well, the graphs here. So as we're seeing here, by 2050, we're going to be experiencing an increase in number of days that we do not experience frost. This could be something that would be considered a positive in ways. The growing season is going to increase in the north. However, when you think about traditional foods such as berries and certain crops, they may no longer have the ideal growing conditions for this. But again, there's positives and negatives to this one. People who are farmers or rely on the harvesting of food that may benefit from a longer growing season, this may be a positive thing for them. But however, if you pair this with habitat fragmentation and the changes to the land and harvesting, so whether these are the First Nations in the Robinson Superior Treaty or at the larger scale, you might see benefits traditional foods, but we also may see changes in what kind of foods we can grow. So potentially growing more things, which could be a good thing. So connecting the elder knowledge that we heard and Western science as a way to move forward. So as we saw from the climate projections, as little as 180 kilometers between these communities are showing differences in future climate change projections. And then after hearing from the elders, you can see that they really do corroborate and they do line up. I didn't go into too much detail about which communities are experiencing which changes, but those are things that need to be highlighted in community-based monitoring and recording. These need to be individual to each community, and the adaptation plans are really important to be community driven. As we've noted, we can't just blanket the entire North. So yeah, again, in general, Western science is agreeing with what we've heard from elders regarding climate indicators such as warmer summers, less frost and freezing. And we can extrapolate from what we see from the Western science to relate to what we've heard from elders, such as changes in fish and fish habitats and populations, changes in animal populations as well. However, we do have a lack of scientific data, making it difficult to plan adaptation strategies. And another issue is gathering and preserving this elder knowledge. It's really important to have that knowledge, and we have to gather it before it's lost. And just being able to have that in a space that's going to be available to people as well is something that is really important in adaptation planning for the future. I know in some of the Nokiiwin communities, we do have a gap in gathering baseline community-based data. Yes, we do have these climate projections and weather stations around our communities. Some don't. So we're using, the closest community to us to get an idea of what the climate has been in the past, or say if certain studies have tracked fish populations or moose migration. The issue is that we don't always have that information for our specific community. And I think after seeing the information from the climatedata.ca, we see that even 180 kilometers difference is going to make a difference when we're looking at each community. So things that the Nokiiwin communities are looking to get are data on water levels of certain lakes, also water quality in these lakes, traditional food, abundance and location, looking at new and invasive species, looking at bird patterns, planning for wildfire and assessing the risk, and more. So we do have many Nokiiwin communities working to gather this information through various programs and projects. I do see a gap in making this information readily available community-wide, in being able to share that information in a way that's useful and a way that's going to be useful for climate adaptation planning in the future. So identifying the most critical indicators will be specific to the needs of each community, its members and its priorities. But based on the concerns from the community elders from these Nokiiwin communities and from the reports I've been looking at, these are some of the priorities that may be relevant. So they include preservation of traditional hunting, gathering, and fishing territories, preservation of traditional foods, animals, and fish, prevention of wildfire risk to community, disease prevention and education, knowledge of ice safety, and knowledge of extreme temperature safety and infrastructure needs. So I've listed a few of these priorities in the coming slides, and listed some of the adaptation options and strategies that we may come up with, or that we had come up with in these climate reports. Feel free to jump in, or perhaps we can just go back to some of the slides during discussion to talk about what may work. I know we have people that aren't necessarily from Northwestern Ontario and within the Robinson Superior Treaty, but we can see, how those might be applicable to different communities in different areas. So loss of traditional foods such as berries and rice. So the factors here that are going to influence that are temperature change, precipitation, the weather, and the availability of pollinators. So an option for adaptation could be monitoring these species by identifying the berry patches, realizing that we may have to travel further or have an increased effort for collection and making strategies for that, such as having days where community members go out in groups to collect, ride sharing, stuff like that. Looking at protection for these growth areas and considering the cultivation options that are available. A risk here is, if we essentially do nothing, is the loss of traditional food and practice and reduced nutrition as well. So there's a little graphic here how it's saying how climate change makes harvesting in some areas in Northern Ontario more difficult due to longer and more intense dry spells. So it's saying assessing the drought risk, monitoring these important species, sharing resources among the community, adjusting routes and timing if possible or necessary, and protecting these important habitats. So looking at the decline in fish populations and size of fish. So the influential factors here are temperature, including water temperature changes. So an adaptation options are to protect the fish habitat, protect aquatic system health, and monitor the populations of fish. The risk here, if we do nothing, is the loss of traditional food and practice and reduced nutrition. After adaptation, if fish populations can be protected, this risk may be lowered. So climate change is stressing out the fish populations, as we've heard, and sustainable fish harvesting in the future could be an adaptation option. So in this graphic here, you see some pictures of fish along with some adaptation strategies. So protecting cool water areas to help cold water fish and cool water fish is really important. So considering having shaded areas, so planting trees along riverbeds if possible, having tributaries, as those are, or at least protecting tributaries because they can be a lot cooler. Identifying areas where there's deep pools, see where there's areas of groundwater and spring seepage because they can be up to 20 degrees cooler, and looking at side channels, which are also going to be a lot cooler. So looking at the decline in moose population, influential factors are temperature increase, vulnerability to thin ice, migratory shifts due to deforestation and industry. An adaptation option would be to monitor the populations, protect and improve the habitat, sharing harvest within the community, realizing that it may require further travel for hunting, and again, similar to other harvesting methods, perhaps ride sharing or making a community event out of it, which is, typically already goes on, and restoring traditional hunting grounds. Risk, if we do nothing, loss of traditional food and practice, reduced nutrition and food security. So after adaptation, the risk may be lower, and also sharing of harvest within the community can improve food security as well. Increased wildfire risk. So influential factors include weather changes and forestry practices. Adaptation options can be to monitor bush conditions, encourage safe fire practice, create community fire plans, for example, with the MNRF Fire Smart plans, ensuring community evacuation plans are in place. So risks are damage to the community and the surrounding area, need for evacuations, and threat to human safety. So even in Nokiiwin communities, we've experienced wildfire in our communities, and this is a big one for our communities in ensuring that we have safe fire practice and creating these fire safety plans. And after adaptation, we hope that this risk of human-caused fires would be lower through education. Fire safety plans reduce the risk to the community, and evacuation plans can protect the members. So although fire is natural and essential, it is still important to understand that climate change is affecting how fire operates, and that we can actually do some simple things to reduce the risk to the community. So those are just a few ideas and options. They're pretty high level. a great place to start for many communities. But I did find a few recurrent themes within all of these within adaptation strategies, including the incorporation of education and awareness within community members, preservation and restoration of the land, including community-based monitoring and recording this monitoring data to form a baseline data. So this is both from knowledge holders and from scientific methods. Again, if we don't have this baseline data, it's really hard to then go off and make an adaptation strategy, or to be able to say, yes, we used to have this much moose and now we have this many coming through our traditional lands. Like, it's really hard to make those claims without having this knowledge recorded. So that's a big thing, is to actually have it recorded. Interviews is a great way. Study groups and forums are also another way. And lastly, I always like to include something like this. So because climate change and talking about climate change isn't always easy, it can feel very doom and gloom. There's often a sense of loss as a result of the change that we're seeing. And it can be hard to realize that we can't tackle it all ourselves. When the Brace team went to a conference called Adaptation Canada in 2020, I attended a session that was really eye-opening on the impact that climate change has on our mental health, whether we realize it or not, and especially on those climate scientists. So it's just really important to recognize that. I've added First Nation Hope for Wellness helpline here, and at the website here it has the helpline available in different languages as well. And again, lots of the information that you saw here is going to be available on our Facebook group, the Acclimate Now Northern Ontario Adaptation Knowledge Network. It's open and available for anyone to join. It's a really good starting point, and we have some pretty good discussions on there, and people are there to help with questions and stuff like that. So I encourage you to join that group if you're not a part of it already. And that's it. So thank you for attending. That's my email if you have any questions and you want resources. And I'm happy to continue talking about all this with anyone. If you want me to go back to certain slides and take a look at some of those graphs more closely, just let me know.